All right, in this video, I am going to be giving you a very quick primer on working with video in Cubase and Nuendo, specifically working with music. So we're just going to get a video inside the project, talk about all of the different considerations that you have to make when you're doing this kind of work. In a future video, I hope to do the same thing with sound effects and sound design kind of basics. And I'm just going to use a little video file here from a short film I made about 11 years ago almost. A really neat, special little short film when I was just getting into video production, and I'll put a link to it in the description. Make sure you go watch it because I'm really proud of it and what I did 11 years ago. And it's just kind of special to me. It has an elderly man in it who's passed away since, a veteran, a World War II veteran. Anyways, this one's all about music and video, so let's get right into that and talk about the first few things you need to think about. Okay, so project setup. What I recommend you do is you go to project setup, and make sure that your sample rate is at 48 kilohertz. Digital video has been at 48 kilohertz forever, and it's best to work at this sample rate when you're doing stuff for video. You can also set your bit depth to something much higher, but we'll set it at 48 kilohertz, 32-bit float, and later on for digital video, you'd mix it down at 48 kilohertz, 24-bit. So we've got our sample rate set, and now we need to get a video file into the project. And there are a whole bunch of problems that can come up with getting video files into Cubase. And I do find that on the Mac, MP4 is the best format, the best codec to use, but there's all sorts of different versions of MP4 as well. If you have iMovie or Final Cut Pro, it's astounding, but every time I export like an H.264 file out of Final Cut Pro, those files work perfectly in Cubase. MOV usually works as well, but then again, you can have different wrappers and things like this, so it can get a little bit ugly. If you're on a PC, I would love for some PC users to comment in the comment section the best codec to use for PC. It's been a long time since I worked on a PC. So next thing we're gonna do is bring our short film, drag it right into the project. So when you do that, you get a video track in Cubase. So you also get an audio track with the music or the sound from your actual video file. So this one right here has my soundtrack and my voice files in it already. And then the other thing you gotta be aware of is you press F8 and up pops the video player. It's always a floating window. Another thing that I would love to see in Cubase is some way to have this just pop up, say in the lower zone or something like that. That being said, because I usually have two screens, I will often do something like put the video player on a separate monitor. It's a really great reason to have a separate monitor. Another thing I do with my TV here, this giant display that people like to mock me for having, is I go up to workspaces, and I've set up a workspace where the video file is in the top corner, the mixer is up next to that, and then the main project is underneath that. And now I've got my main project window down below, which puts it right at my eye line. So that's just my hack for working with Cubase. It's actually almost how I always work, so I don't strain my neck looking up, but I get this giant display, and it works out really well. So now I've got my video player right here. I can scrub through with Cubase, and I can watch the video up top. There is a feature that I'm going to be using a little bit in this video, and I've got a quite old video, 6 years old, that talks about this thing called edit mode that came to Cubase only 6 years ago, but was in Nuendo before that. And that's if you go up to transport and turn on something called video follows editing. If I make an edit, if it's turned on, watch what happens when I resize this. The video scrubs through. So if I turn the snap off, now I can resize this wherever I want. With this little feature, you can drop in a sound effect. In this video, this guy drops his phone. Let's pretend this is a sound effect of something being dropped. And I can scrub this through and find the exact spot where I want that thing to hit. And there's the drop right as it hits the ground. And it's just a really easy way to find exact spots. I use this for footsteps. I use this for everything. And so make sure you go watch that video to learn about this edit mode. And by the way, anytime you want to watch full screen, all you got to do is right click on the video file and choose full screen mode, and it will just pop up in full screen. So when it comes to music, what I like to do is maybe start out and get some kind of idea going. And so that's going to be your first step as a musician, but you also got to find out where you want music to begin. And so before I even get to that point, what you might do is something that's a little bit like a spotting session if you were a professional composer working on a big budget film. And in a spotting session, you'd go to the studio with the directors or the producers, all of those kinds of people, the editors, and you'd watch through a rough cut of the movie and you'd decide what points music comes in and what points music comes out, and maybe what styles of music and stuff like that. And so what I like to do in Cubase is use the marker track, use a marker track, because you can have multiple marker tracks, as a place to put hit points. So you go to Project, Add Track, and Marker. And in this case, I'm just going to call this hit points. And we get a marker track that I'm going to toss up at the top of my project, maybe the very top. And now I can just line up these little markers that say, at this point in the movie, I want the music to start. And then at this point, I want it to stop. And later on, we could set up a marker track for sound effects as well. So I might have specific sound effects or moments where I want big things to hit. And I'm going to drop in a marker. And all I do is Option click or Alt click on a PC. And once you've done that, now I can grab this marker and I can move it around. And as long as video follows editing is turned on, as I move the marker, I can have it placed precisely where I want the music to start. So in this movie, there's a bit of a fade in right here as this guy is leaving the mechanic. So I drop my marker right about here. I'm going to say music in at this point. Next thing I'm going to do is go find another marker. But before I do that, I should mention something that is very important, and it's a concept that's quite confusing in Cubase when you're first getting used to it. And that is, if you are a musician who's only worked with music projects in this kind of software, the way it works is every single track that you have is by default in Cubase, I'm pretty sure, is going to be set up to be set to something called musical Timebase. And what that means is if you put events, say you play something on the keyboard at bar 2, in the middle of bar 2, and then at bar 4 you play something, and if you change the tempo, it's going to actually move those events with the bars and beats so that what you played in the middle of bar 2 always happens in the middle of bar 2. Even if you slow it down, you slow your tempo way down, it's still in the middle of bar 2. So that's called musical Timebase. And we can understand that if you slow it down, it's going to take longer to get to the, what happens at the middle of bar 2. The other alternative for events on a track is not to be locked to bars and beats, but it's to be locked to moments in time. And that's called the linear Timebase. So if I click this right here and I change that little music note from musical to linear, now this little event is locked to a moment in time that happens to start where the fade in happens. And watch what happens if I change my tempo. If I change my tempo to something like 100, that marker is still staying at this moment in time. That marker is staying right here where this fade in happens. And that's because we've got this set to linear Timebase. If I set it to 120 and I change this to a musical Timebase, now this music in marker is set to happen at bar 3, right at the beginning of bar 3. That's not going to be very helpful for you if you change your tempo. So let's change the tempo to 60. And now you can see that this marker is completely at the wrong spot. It's coming in way after this video fades in. And that's because we just made the tempo twice as slow. And so bar 3 happens now twice as long later, kind of thing. So that is not the way you want to work with these markers. These markers need to be locked to moments in time. So I'm going to set my tempo back to 120. I've got my musical Timebase turned off now. I'm going to set it to linear, and that means every single marker I drop in is at a moment in time, just like my video and the things that are happening in my video are all happening in moments in time, in minutes and seconds. So sound effects, sound design, anything that has to do with something that's locked to something that happens in the video, you want it set to a linear Timebase. Anything musical, you're going to want it set to musical Timebase, because what you're going to see us do is we're going to take a tempo and we're going to change it so that 8 bars of music or 4 bars of music fits in and times out perfectly with a moment in the video. But we want all of our notes that are happening at bar 2 and bar 3 and bar 4 all to stay at bar 2 and bar 3 and bar 4. Hopefully that makes sense. Please ask me in the comments if there's anything that you need cleared up about this concept of linear and musical Timebase. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, let's figure out where we're going to have this little musical thing change. So we have the guy coming out of the mechanic shop, walking through the park, and there's a couple changes. I might want to hit those. As a composer, you could take this little chunk as a moment, and then you could take this little chunk as a musical moment, and something changes slightly. So maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll just put in a couple of little scene changes. Let's try this. Let's put another marker right here. Or maybe I'll just call it park. And there's another change right there. And I would normally just zoom in and get this lined up perfectly, maybe like this. So there's another one. Let's see what else we got. At this point right here, things start to get a little frantic as he pulls out his phone and realizes that he's running late. So things get a little more frantic right there. Maybe I want to amp up the music a little bit right there. And then we have this moment where his phone rings and he stops and the camera moves right around him and reverses the shot. I'll show you what I did musically to accentuate these parts. I'm just going to fake something for now. His phone rings, and that's a big moment. So we want to hit that maybe musically. So the phone rings, and then pans around, and he says hello. So at this point, what I did in the original soundtrack was just stop the music. So he says hello. So there it is. We've got a bunch of different moments. And what I would probably do is have some kind of musical thing that starts here and then maybe starts to build up a little bit here and then ends either at the phone ringing or at the point where he says hello. So what I'm going to do now is just play around a little bit. So I'm going to look for some virtual instruments that maybe get me some inspiration. Sometimes I would start with a piano. Let's see what we can get for some inspiration. And then I'll do some cutting just to kind of speed this little process along. Okay, I'm going to start with this Claire Avant. I'm going to put my cursor right at the beginning and go Shift Space. So I'm going about 102 beats per minute. So now what I need to do is add a tempo track. And with music projects, you're going to want to get a tempo track in there soon because the tempo track is going to be shifting all over the place in your project as different musical things happen, as you want music to change. And I'm going to select the first marker. And all you got to do is make sure you have this information line on. And if that information line isn't on, you're going to find it, this little guy right here, and then just make sure the info line is on. And keep that on. I use that all the time. So now I'm going to select this little dot right at the very beginning of my tempo track, and I'm just going to change that to 100. That's probably close enough for now. We're not worrying about where these markers are in our project just yet. We'll worry about those when we get there, because you can see if I'm at 100 beats per minute, this song starts at a kind of strange spot, like halfway through sort of bar 2. So we're gonna have to work with that. I'm gonna show you something. I'm gonna play this music in, and we're not gonna worry about the fact that it doesn't start at the beginning, but I'm gonna start it at bar 3. And I'm just gonna play something in, and once I've played it in, I'm gonna actually warp the tempo so that the project starts exactly at bar 3. I'm going to warp this tempo grid here so that bar 3 starts exactly where this music is supposed to start, where this fade in comes in. What we need to do is go to the time warp tool, which is this little guy right here. You may have never used it before. And if we click on that, there's a couple of options. If you hold it down, there's free warp, which we don't want to mess with here. There's warp grid, and then there's warp grid and musical events follow. So we want to stick it on musical events follow. So what that means is any events that are on MIDI tracks that actually have this little music note turned on, that means they're going to follow. So see at bar 3 right here, if I grab this and just start moving it, you can see that these notes still start at bar 3, no matter how much I've moved this tempo over. So we've now got 2 bars of 73 beats per minute, and then it jumps to 100 beats per minute, but our MIDI notes are staying locked exactly where we want them. If I had this set to linear time base, so and by the way, it's up here in the inspector if you don't see it in your track. And if I have it set to linear time base, watch what happens. Those notes stay where they were, kind of locked in that spot. And that's not going to help us much. So I set this back to musical time base. And then what I do is I can just grab, you're actually grabbing the bar or you're grabbing the beat and you're moving it. That's what you're doing whenever you're messing with this time warp tool. So I'm going to grab this bar 3 and I'm going to drag it over so that it starts exactly where, my marker is. So I'm going by my marker. If you don't have audio, don't use that. Use your markers. So I'm using my marker to say at this point, that's where I want the music to come in. So now it changes the tempo of these first 2 bars to 122 beats per minute. It just happens to change them and drops in a marker or drops in a little tempo point, a tempo event, and changes the tempo to 100 beats per minute. Okay, so we've just kind of warped the grid. The music starts at the right spot now. We've got this strange little 2-bar where the tempo is a little bit faster. Let's set our song to start right here at bar 3. And what we're going to do instead of the pre-roll is we're going to actually just give ourselves count in. So in order to get to that, we're going to go to the metronome setup, which is over here. And we're going to say number of bars count in. We've got 1 bar. And we're going to say time signature at record start position. So what that means is when I press record, or the star on the keyboard, it's actually at 100 beats per minute. So it doesn't matter what the tempo is before. Otherwise, I'm at 120, a little bit faster, and then slower. So it's a little bit confusing. So now I'm going to replay this and try and really play with the timing of everything, including what happens when the phone rings. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start at bar 3 with a bar of count in. Okay, so I just kind of got my tempo in the right ballpark, started playing stuff, and then, made up this thing that happens when the video starts to change. So this is a very common way for me to work. And the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that this final ending lines up perfectly with where he says hello. And not to mention, we also got this frantic part, this we can move this bar 9 over just a tiny little bit so that this change that happens visually lines up with the music just a little bit more. So watch this. I can, with the time warp tool now, I can grab at bar 9 and just move this over a little bit. And you see how my bar 9 information is sliding over and everything before it is stretching out, getting a little bit slower. And you'll even see the tempo that's happening. Look at the tempo right here. At bar 3, it's 90. As I move this around, it's changing. So we're going to drop this at around where it says frantic, even though it's not really frantic, but it's just a change. And then, so what that means is for this first section, this chunk is at 97 beats per minute. This chunk is now at 100 beats per minute. It's all based on where you drop these little markers. If you decided I don't really want it to change at that point, what you could do is lock in however many bars you want with a little point. So you just drop a point. Now both these points are at 100 beats per minute, but now if I grab this one, now this one moves over and it makes these 2 bars significantly slower to make up for the difference. So these little markers, dropping these little anchors, that's going to determine the last point that's changing as you move the next little point over. It's kind of confusing at first, I gotta admit. But once you start playing with it, hopefully this will start to make sense. So I'm going to grab at bar 9, I'm just going to move this over a little bit. And now you can see my chord that's supposed to happen when he says hello is at the wrong spot. So I can grab bar 15 and I can just click and drag and move it over. And now this chord lines up perfectly at that moment in the video. So we're warping this grid so that our MIDI notes all line up. Okay, so let's put in some cello. This tempo right here is at 105 beats per minute. This one, changes to 100. This one is at 97. So let's see how this feels, and we'll see if the timing changes are too drastic, because sometimes that happens. And in situations like that, what I'll do is I'll add maybe 2 beats. So I'll have a bar that has 6 beats in it instead of 4. And in order to do that, that's actually something we should mention. I'll go add track, right click and go add track, and I will go to the signature track. And so if I needed I needed this chord to line up, say, with this point right here. Let's say this point was actually right here. Then I might do something like, let's put a bar of 6/4 right here. So we go and make sure the snap is on. And I'm going to say, let's make that one 6/4. And then at this one, it's at 4/4. And we're good. And then I can say this chord here actually happens at bar 15. So now everything is musical. Whoops, I didn't quite get everything, but you get the idea. And that's how I would sometimes make up for weird discrepancies in time where my tempo just is too far off. But it's just this kind of back and forth of pushing the tempo, trying to make a piece of music that's at a certain tempo fit a very strict length of time in your video. Actually worked really well. Aligning our music to fit with moments in time, and you just keep going throughout the whole project just like that. And it's extremely fun to work with video. I think it's my favorite thing of all the jobs I ever get to do is to compose music to video. And I don't get to do it that often, but maybe I'll start making some more videos and make music for them, because it's a lot of fun. And now I'll just show you the beginning chunk with the actual sound. And if you want to watch the rest of it, you have to go to the link and watch the rest of the film. And please go watch it. I don't get views on that kind of stuff because, I don't know, it's not about the newest, shiniest toy and stuff like that. And I'm tired of doing videos about the newest, shiniest toy. I just want to make fun things that inspire people, right? So here we go. Anyways, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of this. You're amazing if you are. And to all my students who I really made this video for, you guys are incredible. So anyways, here we go. So this is my original soundtrack for this piece of video.
Yeah, I'm just on my way to work. Yeah, I guess I had to leave a little early this morning. Well, you didn't exactly seem like you're in the mood to talk about it last night.
Anyways, I'll stop it there. Go watch the video. And it was written by my friend Eric. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.